Hello Internet. I've been thinking about doing an occasional series looking at underappreciated or unloved horror sequels and maybe just reassessing them. It's no mystery because I've popped it in the title of the video. We're going to be looking at The Fly 2 here. All the titles that I've thought about for this series all seem at the moment to have one thing in common. They're movies that follow masterworks by master directors and directors who at the time of making the original were at the absolute height of their powers. The Fly 2 is no exception. So before we dig into the sequel, just a little bit of context about where it's coming from and what it's following. David Cronenberg's 1986 film The Fly is itself a remake. It's a remake of Vincent Price's 1958 movie called The Fly. David Cronenberg's movie is, as I'm sure you know, not just a remake of a Vincent Price movie. It's a distillation of all of his cinematic and storytelling obsessions up until that point, refined and then shot through the lens of this monster movie, a B horror movie. And I personally think it's an absolute work of art. His obsession with evolution that you see in films like Scanners and Videodrome, his obsession with diseases with a purpose and mutation that you see in Rabid and Shivers, and his overriding obsession with identity throughout all of those movies. If I am me and my body becomes diseased and the disease takes over my body, am I someone else? Do I become someone new? Do I become something more than human, something less than human? Is the disease me? Am I the disease? All of these things are ideas that Cronenberg up until this point had been playing with throughout his entire career become laser sharp and focused in The Fly, and it's amazing. And the natural question is, why would a movie like that need a sequel? And the honest answer is, it probably doesn't. And the second honest answer is, money. Now, Vincent Price's original movie had a sequel, The Return of the Fly. And this movie, in some ways, whilst being a sequel to this movie, is also itself a quasi-remake of The Return of the Fly. That 1959 movie followed the son of the original scientist who was trying to perfect his father's experiments in teleportation that went wrong and fused him with a fly. And that's exactly what we get here in this movie as well. So I'm going to stick it in and we're going to see what happens. There's your context. For full disclosure, I really like The Fly 2. I haven't seen it for ages. It's not as good as Cronenberg's movie, and it's never going to be. But I remember really digging this, so I'm going to see if there's things that we can pull out of this movie to save it some face and really recommend it in its own rights rather than being in the shadow of its bigger brother. We're 40 minutes in and I've had to pause the video. Anyone who's seen this film and seen some of my other videos where my dog has stuck his face in will understand why I've had to pause it. We'll get there because I actually believe it's one of the strengths of the film. It's just very tough. So we're going to deal with a bit of business first. 4 people are credited with the screenplay for this. 2 dudes called Jim and Ken Wheat, Mick Garris and Frank Darabont. Between these 4 gentlemen, I think either in directing and or writing duties, they are responsible for more Stephen King adaptations than anyone else on the face of the planet. We've got between them either writing or directing credits or both. The Mist, The Green Mile, The Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, Riding the Bullet, Quicksilver Highway, Bag of Bones, Desperation, The Shining and The Stand TV movies, and Sleepwalkers. The very first thing I noticed when the titles came up and the theme tune started up, I thought, I recognise this theme tune, this sounds very familiar. The guy who did the score for this is called Christopher Young. He scored Hellraiser 1 and 2, and his main theme for this is very reminiscent of his Hellraiser scores, very stately, orchestral, but promising something grandiose and menacing, which doesn't seem to play out at first in this movie, apart from the opening scene where Gina Davis's character from the first movie, now not played by Gina Davis, gives birth to Seth Brundle's son in a scene very reminiscent of the Gina Davis nightmare sequence in the first movie, where she's giving birth and something's going wrong and the doctor brings out a maggot. It's an awesome dream sequence. In this, they bring out a sort of slimy cocoon. She dies whilst giving birth, and they break open the cocoon and there's a human baby inside it. Apart from that very opening sequence, right up until now, tonally, this movie reminded me an awful lot of Disney's Space Camp. I'm sure Space Camp is a Disney movie. And Daryl as well. I don't know if you remember that movie from the mid-80s about the robot kid D.A.R.Y.L. Daryl. Can't remember what it stands for. Doesn't matter. The first third of this movie, pretty much solely apart from that birth scene, feels very much like one of these mid-80s Disney movies. You've got the young prodigy kid, Martin Brundle, now the son. He's got accelerated growth, but he's also a prodigy, a savant. He's got a photographic memory, so he's intelligent way beyond his years. He can hack computers, he can make things. He makes, as a little boy, he makes this helmet with all sorts of goggles and gizmos and things that come off of it. Reminded me a little bit of can't remember the character's name, the one in the Goonies that has all the traps and the gizmos, the Inspector Gadget kid in the Goonies. How can I forget his name? Now, Martin is being brought up by Bartok Industries. The opening shot of the movie is the Bartok Industries building. He is property. They're doing all sorts of things. He's a level 4 project, he's told by one of the doctors who works with him, and there are level 5, zone 5 projects, and zone 4 and zone 3 and whatnot. He grows up for the first few years of his life in one room, one wall of which is a mirror, but it's a one-way mirror. He knows he's being observed all the time. He is a lab rat. They are testing him, experimenting on him, taking samples of his blood constantly, and this is his life. He's a battery hen. There's a very strong anti-vivisection message that runs through this movie. Now he learns that this room is all he's ever known. He learns that there are other zones. So like the precocious genius child he is, he hacks the computer system and gets himself clearance to the other zones. By the 13-minute mark, he's found a room full of caged animals, and he's made friends with a retriever. It's the only decent conversation he's ever had in his entire life, when he's talking to this dog, and he's telling this dog, I've got a very rare disease that means I grow faster, which is quite a good thing, but I guess the downside is it means that I'm going to die soon. Only 2 people in the world have ever had this disease, me and my father. These are the lies that the Bartok industry is telling him. But considering he's always surrounded by doctors and scientists, this conversation with this golden retriever is the first honest conversation he's ever had in his life. So he starts squirreling away bits of his food to sneak out of his room at night and feed the dog and make friends with the dog. So, like I say, feels a lot like Space Camp with the kids with all the gadgets and the robot buddy pal in Space Camp, or Daryl, the precocious genius child, although in Daryl it's because he's a robot. At the 17 minutes, so we meet the dog at about 13 minutes. 4 minutes later, Martin goes into another area of, he goes to visit his dog, and there's the cage is empty. So, and there's a little note saying that he's been taken to another sector. So he goes to the other sector, and there is where the Bartok Industries are continuing their tests on Seth Brundle's teleportation device, and they put the dog in it. And if you've ever seen the first movie and you know what happens to the monkey that gets put through the teleportation machine, the first monkey, not the second one that survives, you know what's going to happen to the dog. So affecting is this relationship between this boy and this dog that has taken 4 minutes of screen time, that when the dog comes out of that teleportation machine turned inside out, it's a gut punch. And this is the first of 2 gut punches that this movie delivers in the first 40 minutes. Martin screams, Bartok's there, his father figure. We see Bartok meet him once and asks him to think of me as your father. And a little bit later on in the film, he asks one of the doctors, will Mr. Bartok be coming today? So you get the impression that he's an absentee father. He believes Martin is his property, but spins this web of lies. All Martin wants is a human connection. So within the space of 4 minutes of movie time, he's made friends with this dog, made the only natural connection, the only decent connection he's made with another human being in his entire life. And 4 minutes later, he sees the dog get turned inside out, and is told that the dog was euthanized instantly. The next thing we cut to is his 5th birthday. Now he's played, physically he's now fully grown. Intellectually, he's fully matured. He's beyond anyone else working at Bartok Industries, and he's now played by Eric Stoltz. And so on his 5th birthday, Mr. Bartok decides to make him a free-range hen rather than a battery hen. Takes him out of the room with the one-way mirror, gives him his own place, and gives him a job in Bartok Industries. And the job he gives him is to try and figure out how to work his father's teleportation devices. They can't work it out. He gives him a whole load of videotapes of his father's work. If you remember, in the first film, Gina Davis was documenting him, so there were lots of pieces to camera. There's an excellent little piece where he's watching a video diary of Seth Brundle, his father, Jeff Goldblum, and a nice little golden nugget here. They could have just lifted a scene straight out of the first movie, but instead they lifted one of the diary pieces that was deleted from the film. So whilst continuity-wise and the look of it and everything is perfectly meshed, it's extra information from us. It's a scene that didn't make it into the first movie, so it's new information. I love that little touch. I really appreciate that. They could have just taken something that we'd already seen to make us go, oh, it's the first movie. But no, they take a scene that didn't make it into the movie. Now, he meets a young lady who works there and starts getting friendly with her. And now he does have a human relationship. He has human contact, friendship and trust, and seeming freedom. And she invites him to an office party where he hears some people talking about the thing they've got down in the basement somewhere. And he overhears someone say, I can't believe that thing's survived for 2 years like that. And one of the other guys makes a joke and says, yeah, we call it Timex. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking. So Martin decides to go and have a look, and it's our dog. The dog was not euthanized. The inside out dog is still alive, kept in a pit, covered, the floor covered in straw, and fed with a bowl of gruel that gets pushed under a grating. And that's your gut punch. If you care about animals at all, this movie has just punched you in the gut and totally winded you. Eric Stoltz does some amazing work here, reacting to this as a man, but also a 5-year-old child. His first ever friend that he saw supposedly die. He then finds out that the people he trusts, his father figure that he trusts, has lied to him, and this thing has been alive and in constant agony for 2 whole years. So he sneaks back lets himself into its cage, it recognises it. It's a mess. It drags itself over to him. He pets it. You see its awful deformed tail wagging, and that, as a dog owner, is the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. And he puts it to sleep, and I guess right off the back of that, he hasn't worked out quite how to work the teleportation device yet, but that jumps straight to him in the pod now. He's put himself in the pod. He's not trying to teleport, but he's scanning himself. He's obviously just decided, fuck it. This is all bullshit. This is the only thing I've got to work on. So he puts himself in to scan himself, not teleport himself. But yeah, this movie that starts off a little like a Disney movie, it's just punched you in the guts. No, this isn't all song and dance. This isn't all sunshine and rainbows. We're not going to have a happy little adventure against the corporation. It's just got really fucking nasty. The only way, as a dog owner and a dog lover, I can stand what's just happened is because I know what happens at the end of this movie. And payback is a motherfucking bitch. So let's get there. Okay, Act 2, the middle section of the film, starts with some successes for Martin. He successfully works out how to use the teleportation machines, and he starts having success in relationships. The friendship with the female co-worker burdens into a romantic relationship, and we all know in these films that as soon as success and happiness starts, things go downhill. And right on cue, just because he's reached physical maturity, his aberrant DNA cells become active. He starts to mutate, he starts to degenerate. He questions the computer in control of the telepods if there's any way of, because he's done a full body scan of himself, and he asks it, is there any way of extracting the aberrant, the mutant DNA? The computer analyses and tells him not without complete dissolution. And he says, is there any way of replacing the mutant DNA? And it tells him yes, he has a solution, he has a cure. In a very similar way to Seth Brundle's cure, he has to find a donor, a subject B, and he's subject A, and the computer tells him that the telepods can extract his mutant DNA, replace them with the strands of donor DNA, he will be healthy, subject B will be completely fucked. This is also the section where the full extent of Bartok's betrayal becomes apparent to him. Him and his girlfriend make love in his place, and they try and break up the relationship. She's moved to a different building. They're split up. She finds out because a security guard takes great glee in telling her and giving her videotape evidence that there's secret surveillance cameras in his place. And everyone has had a good laugh watching them screwing. It's the same makeup team that did the special effects makeup for the first Fly, so Eric Stoltz Martin's degeneration is really well done. Very subtle at first. He becomes very pallid, tiny, very subtle prostheses around the eyes and the eye sockets, and the forehead that slowly become more and more pronounced as he degenerates. He has a shit fit quite naturally, and Bartok confronts him and basically says, now you know the truth, we can drop all pretenses. And Martin says, I can keep taking my injections again. He finds out that they were just a placebo. Bartok wants this to happen. He wants this mutation because Martin is going to be the jewel in his collection. He's going to be the template, he says, for the Bartok Industries' future plans. With Martin's genetic code and the telepods, Bartok Industries will control the form and function of all life on Earth. So Martin escapes, takes Beth, his girlfriend, with him, and they go on the run. This is the section where the disease is starting to take over, and it ends with probably my favourite scene of the entire movie. They're in a motel, and he's gone from facial prosthetics now to full body prosthetics. It's, maybe I'm overselling this, but this scene touches so many cornerstones of Cronenberg's ideas in the first movie that this movie, whilst it's schlockier, whilst it's more traditionally a horror movie than an ideas movie that Cronenberg's was, that happens to be in the horror genre, this scene here in the motel room touches an awful lot of the cornerstones of Cronenberg's movie. Martin is sick. He's now in full body prosthetic. He's very sickly. He's thin and withered. He looks to all intents and purposes like someone in the latter stages of full-blown AIDS, except with a sci-fi twist, with mutations. I don't mean to offend, but that subtext was definitely there in Cronenberg's movie. So it's there. It's here to be read. I'm not reading too much into this, but it has my absolute favourite bit of dialogue in this. Beth now sees how the disease is ravaging him, and she says to him, "You're getting worse." His voice has changed now. Eric Stoltz is doing an amazing job in this movie. His voice, he lowers it a couple of octaves. Beth says to him, "You're getting worse." My favourite line of the movie, he just looks at her and says, "I'm getting better." All the time, this is whilst he's peeling bits of webbing and skin off of himself, revealing what's beneath. "I'm getting better. I'm healing." And in the same way in the first film that the fly started taking over and Seth Brundle was no more, he was Brundlefly. In this one short scene, the scriptwriters and Stoltz do an amazing job of conveying in a very condensed version, this is the same thing that's happening. We don't have to go over all the same ground. If you've seen the first film, you know what's happening. So a very condensed little one scene, just saying everything that's happening in this movie is happening here, but we're just going to deal with it and move on. I love it. He says to her, as she becomes more and more horrified and goes to leave, he says to her really nastily, because the fly is now taking over. He is changing. He's not Martin anymore. He's Martin Fly or Brundle Fly. He's something else. And he says to her, quite nastily, "If you stay a while, I'll show you a magic trick you'll never forget." She completely flips out. She calls Bartok Industries, and they come in their helicopters and their hazmat gear, and they take him back. And now they've got him back in the labs, and he's in a full cocoon. We're moving into Act 3. The payoff. Bartok is a fucker. He's fucked over Martin, he's fucked over that dog, and in the last half hour we are going to get holy revenge. Can't wait. Okay, wow. The final half hour, Act 3, is a full-on monster movie, and one word sums it up: catharsis. If Cronenberg's The Fly was the head, then this movie is the heart. Cronenberg's movie was presented almost like a thesis. It was the filtration of an awful lot of ideas that he'd been working on and working throughout his career. This movie is full on chest pumping, gut punching, gut wrenching, and the final act is the release of all of that. Martin's password protected the teleporters, so they're useless to Bartok unless he gets the password. If they get the password wrong, it will release a worm virus corrupting all the data. In a lab, he's got Martin in a cocoon, and there is a scene of rebirth. Martin is reborn as Martin Fly or Brundle Fly 2 or whatever you want to call it. One of the amazing strengths of this movie is that in the final half hour, Eric Stoltz isn't in the movie, and you are rooting for what is essentially a giant animatronic puppet. I don't want to oversell this too much. The way they introduce the creature at the end is slightly reminiscent of Alien. For when it hatches, you don't see it properly, you don't see its form or shape. Then a little later on, you get a look at its face, you get a leg, you get an idea of the size until eventually released. There's a really nice little touch. Once it escapes, he kills the doctors that tormented him for his entire life. And the Bartok security people release an attack dog down in the area where he's at, just in case you had the memory of a goldfish and forgot the horrendous fucking dog shit that Bartok Industries did earlier on in the movie. The Rottweiler finds this fucking huge creature and then just sits there and goes, huh? What the fuck am I supposed to do with this? And this huge insectoid hand just comes and pats the dog on the head. It's a lovely little touch. It reminds you of the dog he had previously. It also signposts that even though you're looking at this huge animatronic creature thing, Martin is still in there. It's still the same character, so you can still root for him. It's a wonderful way of shorthanding, keeping us on side, making this leap of faith that the human character we followed all the way through is still this character. And boy does Martin take his revenge. This just goes all out in the final 30 minutes. He's killed two of the doctors that was really the most regular human contact he'd had for the entirety of his life, and they didn't give a fuck about him. He was a test subject. Then it's armed security guards sent after him. If you remember in the first film, Seth Brundle uses his fly's vomit to dissolve his food so he can eat it in liquid form, and at the end uses it almost as a weapon. Well, this creature's got a weaponized version of that. He can spray it. He sprays it into the face of one of the security guards, and there is the most glorious practical effect, face melting, that I've ever seen. The guard literally pulls his own face off down to you can see the jawbone and the teeth and the skull and the bloody pulpy mess, and it doesn't end there. He falls down to the ground. The creature leaves. Other security guards come to secure the area, and the camera stays on this face, and as it pulls back, there's steaming air coming out of its mouth, and as it pulls back you can still see the chest rising and falling. He's still alive. My God, what gruesome genius thought up that touch. One of the security guards is thrown underneath a lift that comes down. His head pops. The main security guard, Brundle, bends him backwards and snaps him in half. Ultimately, it's to get to the end goal of getting to the telepods and getting Bartok. And by now, all bets are off. The cure that Martin didn't want to use of gene swapping because it would mean sacrificing another life. By now, we have a prime candidate, and it's Bartok. So the creature grabs Bartok. He doesn't have fingers anymore, so he has to claw Bartok's hand and type in the magic word, the password, to release the gene swapping sequence and release the teleporters. I'm not going to give away everything. I'll keep the magic word a secret. Watch it. I'm imagining that if you're watching this, which is billed as a defense of the sequel, then you've already seen the sequel. That's why this one is so spoilerific. I'll either spoil shitty movies or retrospectives, which I don't expect people to watch if they haven't already seen the movie. If you haven't worked out by now I'm spoiling the shit out of this movie, get a clue. The creature drags Bartok into one of the teleport pods, and he's in there, and he's got hold of Bartok's hand, and he's doing this, signalling to Beth to hit the enter key and start the sequence, and she does, and the gene swapping sequence happens. What comes out the other end is another marvel of practical makeup effects. It's this weird twisted amalgam of Bartok, Martin, the Fly, in very much the same way in the end of the first film. There was a weird fusion of Brundle, Fly and the telepod, which was genius. The same happens here, and they're sort of conjoined, and Bartok's dragging himself along the floor, Brundle's behind him. He sort of peels himself out of this second cocoon that he comes out of, but now genetically himself. All of his mutant genes have been taken out in this gene swapping sequence and given to Bartok. The payoff to this movie. Right after this, right after we know that, as soon as we know that Martin's fine and Beth knows that he's fine, we cut to a group of Bartok industry scientists in an observation gallery looking down on a pit, and the camera pulls down to the pit, and it's a very familiar pit because it's the pit that they kept the dog in pain and turned inside out and alive for 2 years, and it's beautiful. It's Bartok in there. The company carries on regardless without him. Money needs to make money, right? The wheels of industry don't stop turning just because the head of your corporation, whose name's above the door, has turned into a gene-spliced mutant. So, in a wonderful twist of fate, a wonderful karmic reversal, if such a thing exists, Bartok, now mutated, deformed, drags himself through across the straw-covered concrete floor to the bowl of drool. Ah, fuck you, Bartok. Payback's a bitch. I told you earlier Payback was a bitch. This is a great movie. It is nowhere near as great as the original. Did the original need a sequel? No. But it's got one. And is the sequel worthy of your consideration? Absolutely yes. I wrote down a couple of pros and cons. The cons, it's a simpler film. It's not as layered. Cronenberg is an intellectual filmmaker, no two ways about it. His films are about ideas, and like I said earlier, this film is more about emotions. This is a much more standard horror film, which I put that in the cons, but I don't really see that as a con. In the pros, I'll give it points for not just doing a retread of the original film. The ultimate standard by which I'm going to judge these underappreciated sequels is to ask the question that if this had been a standalone movie, would it be better regarded and talked about in better terms and better remembered? This movie, this solid monster movie with an excellent payoff, an excellent heart, yes. If this hadn't been a sequel to Cronenberg's original, this movie would be talked about. This movie would be remembered and much more loved. This movie deserves your attention. It deserves reappraisal. The Fly 2. Not as great as The Fly. What can be? This is an excellent horror movie. It's an excellent monster movie. It's got a lot of heart and it's got some really hard hits. I rest my case, Your Honour.